This is why I went to art school, Mike.
To talk about money.
To talk about money and spreadsheets and budgets and those kind of things.
Yeah.
If you succeed far enough in this business, your life will be spent typing.
Yeah.
And doing math. Welcome to the Marketing Team of One podcast, where we have conversations about the issues one-person marketing teams face when trying to meet their goals with limited time and budgets. Now here's your hosts, Eric and Mike. So
Eric, what's got your goat today?
You can't just do that. You can't just throw me got your goat. This is not the GOAT podcast, Mike.
Oh, gosh. Isn't that our aspiration?
Nice. Yes. Maybe we're already the GOAT.
The furry farm animal.
Probably both. I don't think of goats now when people say goat. It's been,
I know they've totally ruined it.
There's one every year now. There was,
there's
Brady,
way too many goats out there.
Caitlin Clark now goat.
Yeah,
I would argue probably true.
Yeah,
very true.
Yep.
The goat game has definitely been elevated the past few years.
What's Michael Jordan grazing on? And yes, I said Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. I don't want to hear from LeBron people. All right.
That was our era, man.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah.
That was definitely. And I'm not wearing my Jordans today. I'll tell you what's got my goat. Money.
Money?
Money. That's got my goat.
Yeah.
That's why, I'm a hype beast.
That. I've heard of that once or twice.
But that's why I'm wearing the shoes today. You can see the shoes have the green stripes to represent the money talk.
Oh, awesome. Okay. As part of your art schooling, do they have any personal accounting or personal finance classes that are required?
No. They assume you got that in high school.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm all up for teaching that in high school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because you can't, you go into college, you're not going to be taught like, here's how you work a checkbook and all that stuff. That should be high school material.
Yeah. So we should talk about like it is a gap there.
Yeah.
Like when that, for the most part, most art school students are paying money to go to school with hoping that they can get a return on their investment. And so it seems like they should be armed a little bit with some financial knowledge of how things work to help, so they can start paying off those student loans if they have them or something like that, right? Like, so they can do that more effectively so they're not stuck paying student loans for 40 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you could look at that, actually. Now that has me thinking, as a graphic design student, somebody learning what we used to call commercial art.
Yes.
I don't know what it's called now.
It still is, right?
Is it? Okay, good.
I don't know.
Designers,
our art is applied to way more than commercials, but
right.
That's one of them.
As I like to think of it, we were in a service, a professional service. If you look at the, Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's what we are. We're categorized as a professional service. So we do design, but we do marketing, advertising, things like that. That's a profession. It's like a lawyer, it's accounting, it's all that.
Professional services firm.
That's
right.
That's right. That's what we are. So I wish I learned that earlier, though. Like you brought up art school. Like and I've worked at a graphic design firm since I was 19.
Yeah.
So I've always pretty much my professional life has been in these kind of scenarios. But it took me decades to actually, and there was always a corner of my brain wondering like, why am I doing this thing? Why am I making this package? Why am I drawing this picture or whatever it is? And for decades, I was always doing that. And, maybe you didn't have to worry about it too much back then. It seems like now it's really helpful to know the full spectrum of where you fit into that business model, right?
I would argue you're probably a more valuable person, even if you're not, tightly connected to the money flows or money conversation or something like that. But having an awareness of that makes you a better person, a better member of the team anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Having a better understanding of the business, the role you serve in the business and how you're helping the business make money. And always being attuned to that. I think it's it's essential. You could not. And there's a lot of people who maybe don't care. They just, but like you're going to be more valuable in the eyes of your boss if you can have some money conversations and know that place that you're talking about.
It gets everybody on somewhat of a level playing field too, because you don't have as many questions about intent around what you're doing or what's being asked of you. You can kind of see a bigger picture of, we make this much money from these services and we take the profit or extra from this side and we pay for these things over here. And, it's actually very interesting. And that's what's really cool about it is I feel like, yes, I came from a very creative background, but I feel like now creativity is being expressed, not just in some of the design work and art direction and creative direction that I give, but also in like working with you to like craft business ideas. And those are really exciting because they're include all that stuff plus more, plus business, plus,
I think the term creativity kind of always seems to be like, that's the right brain thinkers, the ones that can do these crazy artistic type things. But I think creativity is so much bigger than that. And applying it to business solutions or business problems, if you have somebody who's a creative thinker, they can really unlock some things that maybe if people who aren't, I think everybody's creative. I don't want to say that nobody's not creative. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I hope that the understanding isn't that, I can't draw that person. I can't draw Tippy.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's so funny how closely tied together the idea of creativity and being able to draw are.
I know.
and like, if I can't draw, I'm not creative.
Right.
Sure you are. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some creative accountants out there. Just look at a lot of the jails out there. They're
filling our prisons.
There's some creativity there too.
That's part of our human nature, though, is to try to express ourselves and make things. That's one thing that obviously separates us from the animals. Although animals make things too. They make houses and nests and tools and stuff. But we're way better at it.
Yeah.
Just saying. Not to flex on the animal kingdom, but just saying.
We just lost half our audience right there.
I gotta keep my mouth
dogs
shut.
Come back. Cats, you can leave. Dogs, come on in.
Hey, let's leave our feline friends as part of the party.
Okay.
Just saying.
All right.
Pretty fragile around that issue.
I know. You're feeling ganged up on.
I am.
Yes. You've got this new understanding, right? You've been in the marketing world for a while, and then as you've worked through things, you start to realize like that the money coming into the business has to serve a lot of different things. Like, what have you seen? What do you do? Do you have any insights into?
Well, it was always interesting to learn where the money came in, revenue streams, and then what they used and where it got spent, and then how they categorize things on how it gets spent, where all of the little different corners, you got to buy a bottle of Windex, you got to, sweep the floors, you got to pay somebody to fix things, you got to, there's all these different when you look at a company, there's just all these categories in it. And when you look at companies, obviously like sales and marketing is one of the biggest things that we run into all the time. We talk to business owners and leaders at businesses all the time about their business and how they get their business. Those are the things, as you learn all that stuff, those are the great valuable questions you can have. And that's why leadership appreciates it, because you understand the landscape, you understand where you fit into it, and then you can talk to larger issues that maybe reach out to other parts of that business, sales teams, operations people, admin people. So you kind of understand how they're all organized and built. And then what budgets they have. How do they spend their money? Where do they put their focus on things? Is it R&D? Is it sales and marketing? Because when you start looking at those budgets and you look at the sizes of the companies, and we're talking to smaller companies, probably 15 million on average revenue. Yeah. But you have to look at how are they establishing their budgets? Because as a solo marketer, you need to understand how much money you have to spend on things. and how much firepower you have to put behind all these different efforts.
Let's say I'm a solo marketer and I'm here trying to accomplish all the marketing goals for the company, right? And I have no insight into budgets, and maybe I don't even get the feeling there are budgets. Like,
Yes.
but let's say I want to. I want to have that conversation with my boss and say like, hey, if I have this amount of budget, how can I provide guidance to the boss? This is assuming the boss doesn't have any kind of budget whatsoever.
Well,
like, are there benchmarks? Is there something that we can come armed with that, now that we have some financial literacy about how the company runs and everything, and trying to get maybe even more responsibility? If you have a budget, and take over responsibility, give me a budget and I'll optimize it. But what are those numbers? How do you even come up with those numbers?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is every conversation will eventually go to money.
Yep.
Because that's one of the resources that's finite.
Yep.
And it's, time, money. Those are the two big things that you're going to be battling your entire career. But yeah, that's a good question, because there may not be established budgets. This may be small organizations just kind of fly by the seat of their pants.
Totally.
I mean, we've worked with them all the time. And it's been interesting. Even some of the larger companies we've talked to, we've said, okay, well, what's the budget? And they're very tight-lipped about it. And maybe that's just the nature of the relationship, us being outside partners.
Yep.
But it really does help to just kind of understand what those budgets are. And a lot of times what we'll have to do is just kind of go in on the assumption of what the budget will be if we made it up because we're not getting any of that data. They're giving us the thumbs up or the thumbs down. No, that's too expensive. Like, with no real ideas. And a single marketer inside of one of those organizations might run into the same push and pull.
Yep.
Where somebody just comes down off the mountaintop and says, no, that's too expensive. And you're like, well, why? Why can't I do that? That really throws a monkey wrench into my hopes and dreams here for what we want to do as far as reaching our goals. So there are things. Deloitte does a quarterly CMO survey, cmosurvey.org. I'll just reference it on the podcast, but we'll put it in links in the description down below in the YouTube. But you can go there and you can see it, and it's free. Everybody can see it. And they do a really deep dive. I think it's hundreds of pages of data around being in marketing and what all these companies do and CMOs are doing and what they're seeing. And they break it down really nicely by company size, company type. Are they B2B? Are they B2C? Those make big, big differences. If you're just selling to businesses, are you selling a product or are you selling a service? So that's where it kind of starts.
Interesting.
Is it B2B product or is it B2B service? Is it B2C product or is it B2B product?
Yeah.
Or B2B service? Sorry. Yeah. Did I lose me? I think I lost myself there.
It's the Red Bull.
I'm like Eminem. Lose yourself. I just lost myself. But that's interesting because you can see by industry and by size how much companies spend on marketing on average. So that's some information that you can arm yourself with to go in and talk to leadership. If they have no idea or they're not really interested in talking about it, you can say, well, we kind of have to establish some sort of boundaries around this. And that might be a difficult conversation, but if they're working on goals, sell more, get more customers, get more leads, there's a cost to that. You can't just do it. There's services, there's products, maybe there's professionals out there that you could hire to help you do that. But you need to know what that information is. So that's a really helpful survey to go through. And it's interesting to see the trend lines too of where they're spending, are they spending less or more, or what's the economy kind of telling them? But usually they measure it by revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So how much money is the whole company taking in?
Yep.
Based on that number, and every company has different ways of dividing up that revenue. Some spend all that revenue on all of their people, and services tend to be like that. All the money comes in, all the money goes out.
Yeah.
There's very little overhead. There's very little there's not a lot of R&D. There's not a lot of, manufacturing equipment or, trucks or something like that. So B2B services, that's what we do. But B2C tends to have to have a little bit more firepower behind their marketing and sales because they're going out to a larger audience. They kind of break it up. They start off breaking it up by those 4 quadrants we just talked about. And then they break it up by industry.
Yeah.
If you're B2B, the average is about 7%.
7% of
Revenue.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you make $1 million.
Yep.
You're spending
$70.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't learned math yet.
No. 70,000.
Yes.
It's interesting too, when you say 70,000, does that go to a staff person you're paying 70,000 and then that's it, you're done? Or are you putting that payroll on a different part of your books?
Yeah.
And how do you come up with that 7% is always interesting. We always pretty much just think personnel is personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And that 70,000 is spent on all the different parts of it, not the person itself.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that's kind of interesting. And you need to kind of define that. I know this is marketing or business 101 stuff, but it's still good to kind of understand there's advertising, there's marketing, and then there's sales. So
Yeah.
there's really 3 teams working all off of what could potentially be the same budget. So you need to kind of establish, just to redefine what that means. Advertising would be stuff where you're buying eyeballs or buying placement somewhere where visibility, you're buying visibility, TV commercials, billboards, you're buying advertising.
Podcast ads.
Think about it. It's powerful. Then you've got marketing, which is very general, but they're providing most of the tools. You could say they're providing the funnel, as it were, if people understand what a sales funnel is. That marketing is kind of the top part of the funnel where you're just general information, helping people with their awareness and their consideration phase of that funnel. And then you got salespeople, and that sales, we'll just call it sales. Most of the time, those are salespeople. And those are people who might have to do more high touch kind of relationship based selling. If it's a high dollar product or service where, it's tens of thousands, hundreds, millions of dollars, a lot of that work is not just click a box, buy now on the website. It's a relationship. It's taking that person, getting to know them. I know in the past, I've heard companies, they'll use like golf club memberships as a big part of their sales.
Yep.
Tickets to a football game, like season tickets to football games. Those are go under what would be sales. That would be a sales cost. But you need to look at the company too and see, do they funnel all that budget into marketing, advertising, and sales, or do they break that up a little bit? Because depending on how they use that.
And I would assume that there's a lot based on your sales process and what's required, that if you are lumping together advertising, marketing, and sales into one slice of the pie, you'd have to evaluate like how long is the sales process? How curated does the sales process need to be? Like for a simple B2C type thing where you're just selling widgets, there isn't a sales process, right? For the most part, it's usually lower cost. There might be a little, depending on the product, but like when you're talking about B2B, some of those things are really high ticket things, right? You have to build a relationship. You might not know that. You're not just going to get a call out of the blue and say, hey, I'm ready to spend, $80,000 on this thing. That could take years to kind of get that kind of thing, right? So you probably have so you would have sales taking more of that. That's a piece of the pie, right? And maybe marketing is taking a little bit less. Maybe there's no advertising at all. So it's a weird mix, and every company's going to have their own mix, right? But they have to have a lot of clarity about how effective all those different things are, and work closely together on all those too. Make sure that marketing is working in tandem with sales to make the best of that, or else you're going to have two different departments fighting it out over budget dollars. When you're sharing like a piece of the marketing or the budget, let's say it's management ownership doesn't see a difference between advertising and marketing. And I could see how they wouldn't, right? They're all like, those could be very easily lumped together, right? But if they also bundle sales into there, right? Like, especially in a B2B thing where marketing's pure goal is to try and feed leads to sales, right? Like, how how can you, do you have any ideas about how you can make sure that that marketing and sales work closely together and that they're not too adversarial about it and really fighting for the budget? Like marketing wants to advertise with, a Super Bowl ad, and the sales team wants to go to the Super Bowl and take a client. Like how do you,
illustration.
is there a way to, do you have any insights into that of how you might handle that?
Yeah, and I
type
think
of breakdown?
that goes into the calculus that you need to work out as to what is the product, what's the sales cycle, what is it one of those products or services that relies heavily on and establish what those ratios are, and maybe even break it down into a math problem.
Yeah.
And just use that as your guide to say, yeah, maybe sales has to get 80% of the budget. But that 20% try to preserve and fight for and maximize as much as possible, because it just might make more sense for whatever you're selling and trying to close deals on. So that's where it comes into big differences when you're talking about like direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can see where that marketing budget goes way up. Sometimes it'll be 20 to 30% if they're selling a product. 20 to 30% of the revenue is spent on sales, is spent on marketing specific, because
that's wild.
Yeah.
Because you also think that probably in a lot of, well, depending on how mature the company is, right? Like another percentage of that is probably going to R&D as well, right? Like you must, you must need some really good margins on your stuff to make up for that, right?
I think that's why the startup community is a really interesting one to look at, because they're just burning through cash. They don't really have much revenue, and that's why those percentages possibly are so high, is because the other side of the equation is there's very little revenue. So
they're not profitable.
Yeah, they're not profitable. And I mean, it took Amazon how many years of being a publicly owned company to become profitable? It was like 15 or 16 years or something before they actually turned a profit. But people knew that once they did, the flywheel would be running, and it would just keep generating more and more cash. So that's interesting when it comes to learning about some of those decisions. But yeah, when you look at like what phase of business, what part of the life cycle is that company in as well? Are they early on startup? Are they mid-range looking to kind of grow and expand into a new market? Or are they very well established and just, like we talked about before on this podcast, are they just keeping the lights on and just keeping the heartbeat going? You know, and maybe that's all they need. So they need to kind of do a self-check too, and see where they're at on that, because not to say a startup has to be only 18 months old. I mean, a startup can be 7-8 years old, and until they've got, depending on what the R&D cycle is, and getting things out there. But so much of like that first stage is building the brand. So you're not just building the product, but you're building the awareness around the product. All that's very expensive. And it's difficult, and you got to have a lot of faith and hope that, and know, educated guess that this is going to be a success, because you're going to be really spending a lot and not making a lot. But as you get into those more established and maybe more conservative industries, let's say banking, for instance, I mean, they really are only, maybe it's business banking. They're spending like 2 to 3% of their revenue on marketing. And you can include sales and marketing and advertising in that budget. And sometimes they're even less than that. If they're relying on the business of 15 wealthy individuals, maybe they're shut her down. Fine. They're good. Just make a sheet, and that's not even something that a marketing person needs to do. You can have some person that's maybe account exec makes their own marketing materials, because that's all they really need. So there's a lot of ways to kind of slice that number up.
Is there, you referred to that CMO survey and everything. Did they provide any other numbers about around like the age or the maturity of the companies surveyed, or the CMO survey?
Yeah, and that's where that average comes in, that 7 to 9. And I think they said actually they're projecting it to move up to that 9% level. Okay. And that probably collects more of that mid-range. So you're not the well-established, which is 2 to 3%, maybe as low as that, or 5%. It's actually more closer to in that established range to be in that 4 to 5% range. if you're in the middle and you're trying to move into new markets or grow the company a little bit more aggressively, maybe take out a competitor or something like that, then you're going to be up in that 9, 10, 11 percentage. Could be even higher though. How aggressive is management and leadership? Are they just like, okay, for 3 years, we're just going to go all in and spend all the money and really try to go for it, and really break into something new and bigger. So that's part of.
So it's like it's a complicated mix, right? Because you've got the size of the company as far as revenue. Is headcount another thing? Does that play into it a little bit? I guess it would ultimately, because it comes to your percentage of revenue that you have to pay people, right?
And that's where that number drops way off. If you get thousands of people on your payroll, the percentage of revenue that you're spending on sales and marketing drops down, because you're probably making a lot of revenue to pay for all that headcount. So the smaller the business, the larger that percentage tends to be too. So if you're under 50 employees, maybe you could have that number way up there in the 30s and 40s even, depending on what you're selling. If it's consumer, I think consumer packaged goods and food, those are way high. Those are always just consistent. So there's an example of, like, you've got big giant brands, P&G, Procter and Gamble, and those kind of companies that are much, much bigger, but they're still fighting it out and competing and spending 20 to 30% of their revenue on marketing and getting the word out there. TV commercials, you've seen all the stuff for that, but it's the big boys club, but that's the game they've chosen, But then there's also those big, large, established industries that have been around for a long time, and they're, trying to change things up or grab a new market, and they could be still spending 7 to 9% of the revenue on that.
So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's arming themselves for a conversation with their boss about trying to establish a budget and giving me the reins to manage that, to try and get results, right? Like, so let's say I'm in a small company. We've got let's say we've got 12 people and we're making, 10 million a year. And I go in there, I go to the CMO survey and everything, and I bring in those numbers, these benchmarks, and I'm trying to poke holes at what the boss might say, right? So, I mean, a lot of places don't have CMOs. Like, if you have a CMO, you've got a giant department of stuff, right? So they're surveying people that are like way up here, right? Like, I could see a boss saying, yeah, those are CMOs. They've got the companies represented there have got to a point where they have a team of people. That's not relevant to us. Did you see anything in those numbers or an experience that tells you that, like, the results of this may come from that, but it does play out in everything else we've seen? Does that?
My experience personally with dealing with small companies like you're talking about, it really depends on the personality of the leadership and how much respect and importance they put on marketing and branding.
Yeah.
That to me is the big X factor. If they have no knowledge or interest, or maybe they're an engineer that just builds things and fixes things, they're not going to have, they may not, I'm not saying every one of them, but they may not have any understanding of it even. Because what's funny is when we get into some of these meetings with some of the leadership, when we have these conversations, is you really find out that you're speaking two very different languages, even though it's all sounding like the same language. And it's really interesting to try to parse out from them and ask a lot of questions to try to get to know where they're at and what their level of, I guess, respect for our industry, where it's at.
Yeah.
Some of it they wear on their sleeve. You can tell right away, like, I don't care. I don't need that stuff,
Yeah.
But then there's other ones that are, maybe more interested or more open. And I think that's where it's a lot more challenging in smaller organizations, because you've got maybe less checks and balances on leadership. And we find that it's so much more based on personality and their level of understanding. So
it's funny you mentioned going into a meeting and saying the same thing over and over again. Like, I'm just kind of thinking of like going out on a date with my wife, and which doesn't happen nearly enough. But
Exactly.
in this fictional scenario, I show up and I have an odd choice for a t-shirt or a shirt I want to wear. So we're not going out to dinner with you wearing that shirt. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're not going out to dinner with me wearing that shirt. And I could say that and we could leave that and have completely different understandings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I going to dinner without a shirt at all?
Interesting.
I don't know if I'd do that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Is she going to dinner by herself?
And you're going to another dinner?
And I'm leaving my shirt on and I'm doing whatever I want?
Because you love the shirt.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or am I changing my shirt? You know, like there's 3 different outcomes from that shared language thing. So it could happen a lot, like with those conversations too. It's kind of funny. It's a funny language thing, I think, more than anything. But
as you've said before, words confuse people.
Yeah,
it's
words
just
can confuse.
Yeah, they're very confusing.
Based on these benchmarks and everything, that even if you aren't a CMO, you know, that they hold up pretty well. You know, it's a good guide. It's a good
starting point.
But somebody else's numbers aren't going to be yours, right? So really what it comes to is arming yourself with some financial knowledge, being able to steer some conversations around and have a real conversation about it. And I think if you come at it with the right angle with your boss, like it come from a place of being able to have some financial awareness, understand some of the the company's financials. Maybe if you're not talking to the CFO about all the numbers, but you might have your finger on the pulse of what you've spent already. Maybe that's your first framework. If you don't feel like it's enough, maybe you can bump it up. But just coming with some financial literacy, talking to and having this real conversation with your boss, that you could establish a budget for a year and would ultimately free you up to do a better job as a marketer, right? Because you could effectively realize, again, you can't do everything yourself, right? You're like, there's rare people who can do all the different things that a marketer needs to do well.
Right.
If you're armed with budget, you can make decisions, and maybe you can find people to help you in the right places. But having the budget up front really helps you unlock that, right?
Yeah, that was a really good summary of what we basically talked about here. I think it's about communication, getting those clear understandings, and getting a commitment. I think it's good to have a year commitment.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that because then it gives you plenty of room, like we've talked about before. It takes a lot of time to do things, especially if you're one person and you're, only on it and don't have a lot of resources. Kind of lay that foundation, get the heartbeat going, and then layer on top of that other campaigns based on what those budget restraints or limits are. Yeah, sounds good.
And we have a thing that we use all the time that we think would be really helpful for everybody too, right? So we put together this annual marketing budget spreadsheet that has a lot of information and maybe putting in the information that going backwards, you can come to those conversations armed with that, right? And say, hey, here's what we've spent, and it totals up everything at the bottom. You can see what you've spent. You can even project too to help craft that.
Plan out a full year, like we just talked about. Yeah, and even utilize that. There's a calculator on that as well, which really helps. You can kind of pull from that CMOsurvey.org. We'll kind of put a little screenshot in there for you. But you can use that and then kind of approach is it more aggressive? Is it more conservative? And kind of use that calculation, put in what that revenue number is maybe, or whatever your budget number is. And that should help you establish how much money you can spend throughout the year. So look for that on the marketing team of one.net website, along with a lot of other fun freebies that we're giving away.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think anyone in a position of power, a boss or something like that, if somebody comes to them armed with this financial literacy and planning and looks at this stuff, you can't help but want to give them more opportunities and give them an opportunity to run with it. So I think so. And if we can help people with that, I think that would be fantastic.
That's our goal here. Right?
Yeah.
We're trying to help as many of these single marketers as possible.
Yeah.
So best of luck to all of you out there arming yourselves with math.
It doesn't have to be scary.
Doesn't? It was pretty scary at the beginning.
Oh gosh. I still don't like spreadsheets. The necessary evil.
They are wonderful.
They really are. But don't be afraid of the spreadsheet. It can be an ally, especially in this case.
You use them all the time
Yep.
for all kinds of fun stuff.
Thanks, Eric.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. For more information and other episodes, subscribe to the Marketing Team of One podcast on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify podcast networks. You can also chat with us on the r/Marketing Team of One subreddit or visit marketingteamofone.com to learn more.